It's 2025, and the illusion of prosperity has finally shattered. America is living through the Great Depression 2.0, but this time it's silent, hidden behind credit cards, gig jobs, and eviction notices. Families once called middle class now ration groceries and sleep in cars parked beside empty luxury condos. The promise that hard work guarantees survival has been erased, replaced by endless debt and collapsing hope. We were told this was the land of opportunity. Instead, it's become a land of desperation, where millions struggle to exist in third-world conditions inside the richest empire on Earth. The Great Depression 2.0 isn't playing out in black and white photographs. It's unfolding in real time, in color, across every American city. From Los Angeles to Philadelphia, tent colonies now sprawl beneath billion-dollar high-rises like a cruel reflection of the wealth above them. In 2025, over 650,000 Americans sleep without shelter each night, yet there are 11 million vacant homes sitting dark, held by hedge funds and speculators waiting for prices to rise. This isn't coincidence, it's arithmetic. The average rent for a one-bedroom apartment has surged to $1,870, while the median wage limps behind at $27 an hour, barely enough to cover survival, let alone savings. To qualify for that tiny apartment, a tenant now needs proof of nearly $65,000 in yearly income and several $1,000s in deposits. For the 78% of Americans living paycheck to paycheck, that barrier might as well be a concrete wall. Families earning $50,000 a year are forced to spend more than half their income just to stay indoors. A single missed paycheck or medical bill can send them straight to the curb. Drive a few miles outside any downtown skyline, and you'll see what economists politely call housing insecurity, and what ordinary people call hell. RVs lined along curbs, families washing in public restrooms, workers napping in parking lots before their second shift. These are not the unemployed. These are nurses, warehouse workers, even school teachers. In the new America, poverty wears a uniform. Politicians boast of a 3.9% unemployment rate, yet ignore the 40% rise in part-time labor and the explosion of gig work with no benefits. The illusion of low unemployment hides a workforce being chewed alive by inflation and debt. The country that once exported democracy now exports despair, proving that economic collapse doesn't need a war or a hurricane. It just needs policy. And as this silent depression spreads, it's creating a new kind of geography, a third world carved inside the first, where survival depends not on effort, but on luck. The poverty map bleeds seamlessly into housing, because shelter has become the front line of America's new economic war. The average home price has crossed $420,000, while the median income remains stuck around $70,000. That means the typical worker would need 6 full years of salary, before taxes, before food, before gas, just to buy a roof. Renters fare no better. To simply move into a modest one-bedroom at $1,870, you now need nearly $7,000 upfront in deposits, fees, and insurance, and proof you earn at least 3.5 times the rent. The math alone eliminates half the population. Housing has stopped being shelter, it's an asset class. Private equity firms, foreign investors, and corporate landlords now own entire neighborhoods, converting homes into permanent revenue machines. Every rent payment is an invisible tax flowing upward. Billions a month extracted from working people who build the very cities they can't afford to live in. Economists call it financialization. But for millions, it's legalized eviction by spreadsheet. Behind the statistics lies a quiet extinction of autonomy. Homeownership once symbolized stability. Now it marks the boundary between freedom and servitude. When mortgage interest hits 7.2%, the dream of buying collapses. The median American household would need $110,000 annually just to qualify for an average home loan. Only 12% of renters will ever cross that line. The crisis doesn't end at affordability. It feeds into infrastructure rot. While investors flip condos for profit, 17 million homes nationwide suffer plumbing, wiring, or structural decay. Rural regions see collapsing water systems. Urban cores face record evictions. Yet the response is always the same: build more luxury towers for the rich, while ordinary Americans are pushed into RVS, basements, and parking lots. This is not a housing shortage, it's a housing capture. The product isn't property, it's desperation. Every lease renewal, every rent hike, every deposit demand is a reminder that survival itself now comes with a price tag. What was once the foundation of the American dream has become its gravestone. And as housing becomes unattainable for the majority, the illusion of middle-class living officially dies, paving the way for a society where even existing requires permission. Once survival itself costs money, sickness becomes a death sentence. The housing crisis bleeds directly into healthcare because both are controlled by the same extraction machine. In 2025, the average emergency room visit in the United States cost $2,900 compared to $6 in Thailand or $12 in Mexico. Insulin that sells for $8 overseas is priced at $140 here. And every year, over 530,000 American families file for bankruptcy simply because they got sick, more than the population of Wyoming. This isn't healthcare failure, it's healthcare design. Every hospital, insurer, and pharmacy is part of a financial pipeline engineered to move wealth upward. Hospitals now operate more like hedge funds than sanctuaries of care. Private equity firms have purchased over 40% of emergency clinics, immediately hiking prices by 30 to 70%.
The economy is worse than people realize, and they already think it's bad. Half of the states in this country are already in a recession, and then an additional quarter are on the brink of recession. We are hemorrhaging jobs in every sector, and even though companies are now realizing just how poor of an investment AI is and how little it returns in terms of profits or productivity, that is still the majority of where investment money is being spent. And as bad as all of that is, that's probably an understatement in depicting how bad our economy really is, because the Trump administration literally said that when they release the October jobs report, they are not going to release unemployment numbers. Meaning they are so scared of people realizing the full weight of the economic situation here in America that they are going to release a jobs report without telling you how many people don't have jobs. The contradictions of capitalism are so heightened at this time. Is it a wonder that people are turning towards socialism as the obvious only viable solution for getting us out of here alive?
Millennials and older Gen Z people in America are dying in excessive amounts, and there's a new study out from the CDC that proves this. About 3 million people die in the United States every year, but for the ages of 25 to 44, 65% of those deaths are what are called excess deaths, which are preventable. Not only did the CDC compare these results to the problems that we have in America and why this is happening, but they also compared this age group to other affluent and industrialized countries across the earth that are comparable to us, and they do not have the same excess deaths numbers for this age group. The numbers are so non-comparable to those other countries that have the same industrialized nation as us that around 700,000 people in 2023 died, and it could have been prevented if they had lived in one of those other countries. Now let's talk about why that is. So the top reasons that they found in this research is obesity and chronic illness, mental health and substance abuse, and the biggest one was economic disillusionment. This means basically someone goes to college, they get a good degree, they can't find a job, they're incredibly stressed, they can't afford food, they can't afford housing, and their mental health, again, goes to shit. Not only that, but they can't afford things like healthcare. So preventative care is no longer a thing for them. You think about people who need teeth being taken out because they're broken and they're going to become septic and get an abscess. Well, they end up dying because they don't have healthcare because they can't pay for it due to all of this economic disillusion. Now, because the CDC found all of this information within their data, they actually went back to 1985. And between 1985 and 2023, 14.7 million people died to excessive deaths. And again, you can remember, those are basically preventable deaths. So the economic disillusionment, the wealth disparity, and not having access to healthcare, and the opioid crisis. I am a millennial, and tons of millennials have been screaming this to the heavens forever, saying that our generation has been left off on a foot that we don't even have. We don't have the foot to be left off on. We had providers screaming that we should take opioids, our parents, and get hooked on opioids. My mom is one of those people. She was on Fenty for 25 years of my life. I'm 30. This data proves exactly what we've been saying this whole time. That America can be industrialized all at once, but the wealth disparity is actually killing millennials and older Gen Zs. It's a sad time to be an American.
Oh, my girl. Oh, my girl. I got an article from Fox Baltimore. We gonna talk about it, okay? I took notes. A source from the White House says that the shutdown wiped out 60,000 private sector jobs. These were not federal employees. These were regular Americans working for private businesses. Why did this happen? Because the shutdown choked $15 billion a week out of the economy. So when the federal workers weren't getting paid, they stopped spending. So there were no lunches, no coffee, no shopping, no services. Like all the things that federal workers use, they weren't using because they were at home. Or if they were accepted, then they were not spending because they're still working, but they, have to pay for gas and all these other things with no paycheck. So that spending normally supports small and local businesses, and those businesses took a hit. Economists say that 60,000 job losses is probably an underestimate. That's what they said. Shutdown effects ripple. The longer people cut spending, the more businesses feel it. Businesses with government contracts especially took a hit hard. I've covered those stories here. Some had to cut hours or lay off workers because of their revenue had stopped overnight. Activity will bounce back fast, but not everything. Spending connected to food stamps, grocery stores, and local services may recover quickly, but layoffs tied to weaker economic conditions may become permanent. A major factor that I did not consider when I did a report on the jobs report for October that we're probably never going to get, they're saying, which I completely forgot about this, but there are 150,000 federal workers who quietly left during the shutdown because they used deferred resignation, and that program kicked in on October 1st. That means the federal government is permanently smaller. Those lost federal salaries equals less spending in local communities. Fewer government contracts and fewer employees equals fewer private sector jobs supported. Jobs market is already weak before the shutdown. Between May and August, only 107,000 jobs were created, and that's extremely low for a 4-month stretch. Economist says the job market is fragile. It's hiring slow, and businesses feel stuck. The private sector layoffs are increasing in certain regions, especially Washington, D.C. Companies are like a deer in headlights, unsure whether to hire or to freeze. And the October jobs report, again, will likely never be released. We need to push for that. I want to see those numbers, okay? I got to get my little nerdy hands on. I have to see. Because the shutdown interrupted the data collection. This creates more economic uncertainty because the public won't know the unemployment rate, the labor force participation, the household data. Actual data from September and October may be released, but it'll be incomplete. We're supposed to be getting September's information this week. And then I read another article that said that they were basically going to make sure that they could get November's information out, which by the time they get November's information out, it'll be December. And it probably won't look as bad because the bulk of it happened in October, which is coming for layoff season. A lot of layoffs happened in October, period. But we were already hitting record numbers during this shutdown. So I want to see those numbers. I want to see those numbers. So yeah, my girl, that was a good estimate. I was hoping not, but nail on the head. And apparently your number was generous.
Yeah, the job market for IT folks is just cooked because whenever I called in for unemployment again, they're like, yeah, good luck out there. A lot of IT folks are looking for jobs too. I've never heard that before. Never. What?
there's something really interesting happening with the folks that are facing long-term unemployment, meaning unemployment that's lasting longer than 6 months. And it is that a lot of folks, women in particular, what I'm noticing, are becoming nihilistic when it comes to corporate culture and the workplace that we have all been raised to believe in. And I'm saying that as someone who is quickly approaching, in about 10 days, the 1-year anniversary of her layoff. I have completely shifted my mentality, is something that I've noticed, particularly in the past, I think, 2 months, which is that I'm not really interested in performing good corporate girly anymore on LinkedIn, on TikTok, in conversations. I'm not really interested in shrinking myself down to fit into a culture. I'm not really interested in hiding my tattoos, hiding my hair color, speaking in a way that is going to please people so that they at least give me a job, whether or not I want to be at that company. And I think a lot of this is going to translate over into how people interact with company culture. Because here's the thing, we are fed up. We are tired of resumes going into ATS black holes. We are exhausted by 6, 7, 8 round interviews. We are pissed off with contorting ourselves into little boxes to better align with some hiring manager or some recruiter's idea of what we should be and how we should show up. We are all still smart. We are all still experienced. We all still really, really have something to add, but we no longer want to conform ourselves. And I am very much there. And if I go through my LinkedIn profile and I go through a lot of my contacts in my network, and especially a lot of the people I have connected with in the past year, they are just as fed up. And you can see it. People are speaking out boldly. People are talking about how broken the system is. People are talking about how screwed up all of this is and how broken. And people are calling out employers. They're calling out leaders. They are calling out just how dysfunctional all of this has become, and they are opting out. They are building communities for people to donate to support one another rather than seeking another corporate job. They are exiting the career path they were once in to do something else. I say nihilistic, which is maybe an extreme take, but that is how it feels. I wake up in the morning just not caring about fitting into other people's boxes. I would rather show up as myself. And the interesting thing is that in doing that, I have found people who are far more interested in what I have to say than when I was being the good corporate girly. So if you're interested in that, if that sounds interesting to you, if you are starting to feel that way, I want to hear about it. Let's talk about not just how broken the system is, but how we are all ready to step away from it and be more ourselves.
This is something that has to happen. It's something that has to happen. It's something that had to happen. It's something that will happen. And it's going to happen, no matter what. No matter whether it's Trump or anyone else. Anyone who says, for example, well, that's what you get for voting for Trump, or you should have voted for Harris. Well, I mean, you're so thoroughly indoctrinated and participating in the deception and the deflection of that system that you yourself are just as much a cause for the collapse of the United States as anyone else that you blame for it. You created a class of national elites, oligarchical elites, whose private profit interests are no longer connected to your own economy. You did that. They're not connected to any productive activity. They're not connected to any nationality. They're not connected to your standard of living, not to your stability, not to your safety, your prosperity, your success as a nation, or anything. And that class of private sector powers became essentially a nation unto themselves, like I've said many times. A nation that transcends borders. It transcends national interests. They don't have any interests except their own interests. You created that, and you celebrated that, in fact. You still celebrate it, never realizing that they would inevitably sacrifice you for their own profit interests, the same way that they've sacrificed millions of people outside your country. You know, you created this psychopathic class of predators. And you expected them to never bite the hand that feeds them, even though the hand that feeds them has always been feeding them hands. You know, now they can't tell the difference between the food and the feeder anymore. It's all just flesh to them. You can't raise a wolf on human flesh and expect him to distinguish between the human you are feeding him from the human who is feeding him. Eventually, he doesn't see you as his master or his owner anymore. He only sees you as food. Well, you raised a wolf on the flesh of the global south, and it turns out you taste just the same. Yes, wolves don't care if it's dark meat or light meat. They'll chew you up either way. Look, for decades, the military-industrial complex, the MIC, in America, it was a towering giant in America, in the U.S. It was the driver of the economy. They shaped policies at home and abroad. But today, there's a decline in its dominance, and that's been coming for a while. It's no longer the sole engine of the American economy. It's no longer the most important engine of the economy or the global economy. Now, this change wasn't due to any great moral awakening or some newfound sense of conscience. No, it's the result of systemic shifts within the American economy, popular fatigue over endless wars, corruption and fraud within the military-industrial complex, and of course the rise of the national OCGFC. The U.S. economy has diversified. I mean, decades ago, in the 50s, say, weapons and military technology was central for America's economic growth. But today, other industries, technology, finance, obviously healthcare and so on, it surpasses that. And of course, globalization shifted the focus from building tanks and jets to dominating digital platforms, international markets, and so on. Then came the end of the Cold War. The end of the Cold War was the big shift when the Soviet Union collapsed. You know, then the supposed existential threat that justified the immense military budgets and spending and so on, that disappeared. That threat disappeared. I mean, you tried to come up with new threats, terrorism, war on drugs, what have you, but none of these threats really could justify the scale of investment that was needed to keep the military-industrial complex, you know, influential. And like I said, the public became tired of wars in the 2000s. Iraq, Afghanistan, it drained the American public, emotionally, financially, politically, and people began to question the wisdom of pouring trillions and trillions of dollars into conflicts that only ever resulted in spreading chaos and destruction. Not to mention, you have rampant fraud and corruption in the military-industrial complex. You have overcharging, you have magically disappearing funds, you know, that were handed over to defense contractors. They've misplaced enough money. The military-industrial complex, defense contractors, have misplaced enough money to house every homeless person in America and educate every child. They charge so much for one weapon that China could probably build a dozen for the same price. I mean, if the military-industrial complex has been the vehicle that carried the American economy, well, it sure isn't a fuel-efficient vehicle. It's a gas guzzler. And of course, you can barely get anyone anymore in America, young people, what have you, who are willing to put on a uniform and fight for this money laundering scam. That's all it is. That's all it is at this point. I mean, you want to send your sons and your daughters to go die in a foreign country for Raytheon? That's what they're doing. They're not fighting for democracy. They're fighting for General Dynamics. Well, nobody wants to do that. How are you going to convince anyone that they're fighting for democracy 6,000 miles away from their own crumbling neighborhood in New York, and their neighborhood is crumbling because all of their tax money is going to Lockheed Martin? You can't convince people to fight for that. You can't. So then, because your pool of soldiers is shrinking, then you have to start changing your approach to killing and carnage. You have to start changing your means of destruction, because you can't really do traditional warfare anymore. You had to develop new technologies, which means that the demand for conventional weapon systems, which the military-industrial complex was based upon, that's given way to focus on drones and cyber capabilities and artificial intelligence and so on and so on and so on. So the MIC hasn't disappeared, but its form and its scale has changed. And part of that, too, is because America started moving manufacturing overseas, you know, globalization and so on. And in order for the for the military-industrial complex to really maintain its importance, well, domestic manufacturing was key. Domestic manufacturing was key. But pretty soon, more and more companies were keeping their toothbrushes and their shampoo in somebody else's house. And you know what that means. America went from being the wife of corporations to being the side chick. See, again, because you had to change how you go about killing people, rather than learning how to get along with people, you had to come up with new technology. And that new technology depends upon electronics, which means rare earths. Well, we're talking about private corporations, talking about profit-driven corporations. So all they care about is money. All they care about is low-cost acquisition. And China flooded the market with cheap rare earths, which caused the market price to plummet. And that put rare earths mines out of business. You see how that works? Just like I was talking about with oil. So now China controls about 80% of the world's rare earths market and 90% of the processing. Think about that. The American military is completely dependent upon Chinese rare earths. You talk about confronting China, but they can shut you down in 3 seconds if they want to. This is what I mean. You literally created this situation for yourselves, and it has nothing to do but play out now. It's inevitable course. It has to just play out. You gave private enterprise absolute autonomy, absolute supremacy, and that included sectors within the military-industrial complex. Your MIC-driven ideological obsession with the Soviets led you to engage with China. And then China opened up. And then you very quickly became dependent upon them. And they have surpassed you to a stunning degree in manufacturing and in technology. And now you can't even make a drone without China. You can't even make a drone. And you need drones because you don't have soldiers. You see? You've been doing nothing for decades now but cultivate your own demise. It's really quite poetic in a way. And in this whole process, like I said, your rich, your companies, your elites are increasingly untethered from your national interests. And now they're floating above the stratosphere, the stratosphere of global financialized capital, and they're looking down and they see America as just another landmass, just another population to be pillaged. And so as the MIC recedes, other factions have risen in prominence. At the forefront, of course, is big tech, which emerged from the military-industrial complex, companies like Apple, Google, Amazon, and so on. These aren't just businesses anymore. Those are oligarchical political powers. They dominate global markets. They shape cultures. They influence politics. They influence politics in ways that the MIC never could even have dreamt of. I mean, they control the flow of information. They control communication. They're gatekeepers of knowledge and power now. They're massive. And then there's, of course, financialization. This is very important. The financial sector not only shapes economic policy, but it exerts immense political influence as well. I mean, the 2008 financial crisis showed us that Wall Street's too big to fail. And since 2008, their grip has only expanded and tightened. I mean, even those tech giants, Google, Apple, and so on, a huge amount of their wealth is actually due to financialization, not sales, not ad revenues. It's through financialization. It's basically fake money. Then, of course, there's the healthcare and the pharmaceutical sectors. Big pharma, it's massive, and obviously incredibly influential politically, as we all saw during COVID. Okay, these are all a-national, along with things like construction and mining and so on, subcategories. And they're all corralled together. All of these diverse business interests, they're all corralled together in asset management firms like BlackRock and State Street and Vanguard. Those three companies constitute what you could call universal owners. They don't operate according to any one country's interests. They don't operate according to any one company's interests. They operate according to the combined interests of international economic sectors. They're the first C in the OCGFC, the owners and controllers of global financialized capital. They're the controllers on behalf of the owners of capital. And they have the reach, and they have the portfolios, and they have the power to coordinate and to orchestrate economic planning across the globe on behalf of the vast array of investors. They control literally trillions of dollars, and they're connected to sovereign wealth funds around the world that gives them influence and access to trillions more. They dwarf the military-industrial complex in this regard, particularly since the primary source of money for the military-industrial complex is the American government. which is extremely constraining for them. That's very limiting for them. Asset management companies, they don't have that restriction. So yes, this is the faction that Trump represents. And you'll see that all of his policies serve that faction. I've said this before. You have to look past all of the MAGA rhetoric, all of the nationalist rhetoric, because all of that is all just a camouflage for what will be the shrinkage of America on the global stage and what will be the ransacking of the U.S. economy. It's like if a snake oil salesman was selling cyanide instead of snake oil. That's what Trump is doing. Like, for example, okay, I've already talked about how his energy policy, how that puts the U.S. on a path to energy bankruptcy, not self-sufficiency. And it will only strengthen OPEC, by the way. But also look at withdrawing from the WHO. Okay, American pharmaceutical companies and healthcare providers, insurance companies, and so on, they're expressing concern and disapproval for what he did, for pulling out of the WHO. But who benefits from that? The beneficiaries are going to be all of the so-called emerging economies, emerging markets, and their healthcare providers, their pharmaceutical companies, their insurers, and so forth. They're hindered right now by patent protections, by regulatory restrictions, and policies against, especially against generic drug production and so on. India and China, for example. This is very important for them. So this is actually the sidelining of America. And of course, the same is true, of course, obviously, with tariffs. You know, basically everything that Trump proposes or promises or wants to do, all of it amounts to shutting America off from the world and directing everybody elsewhere, you know, telling all business to go elsewhere. The only place he approaches with open hostility, you know, from a policy point of view, the only place he approaches with any hostility is Europe and other Western countries, other allies. I mean, he might be serious about trying to take control of the Panama Canal. He might be serious about that. But I think that mostly has to do with just confirming that America is only going to be interested in having influence in the Western Hemisphere, in the global North. But I mean, even that, okay, even that, when you weigh the costs of maintenance of the Panama Canal, management, staff, security, and so forth, repairs, and on, everything that America would have to spend in order to control the Panama Canal, well, the net profit is barely going to be $1 billion annually. That's assuming that the trade flows through the Panama Canal remain as they are, which, given Trump's obsession with tariffs and his obsession with alienating global business from doing business with America, it seems likely that trade through the Panama Canal will actually decrease. So frankly, taking control of the Panama Canal will most likely end up costing America considerably more than they'll ever profit from it. It's the same with Greenland, really. You know, I mean, given how disruptive and how alienating it would be for America to actually force Denmark to sell them Greenland, you know, plus the amount of investment that they would have to put in, the initial cost and the investment and taking over services and so on inside of Greenland. Even with Greenland's natural resources, the U.S., I think, would be lucky to break even. I mean, that's if we take it seriously in the first place. Like I said, nothing Trump says should ever be taken at face value. He never means anything that he says. His public positions are always either bargaining tactics or just sheer misdirections. Both Panama and Greenland, and the idea of Canada becoming an American state, all of these are just moves, in my opinion, to try to estrange allies and isolate the U.S. as much as possible. That's what I think he's doing. And I think that that is the desired outcome. That's the real desired outcome, which is why I think it's a serious mistake to ever think that any politician's rhetoric about why a policy is being pursued is the actual reason the policy is being pursued, whether it's Trump or anyone else. It's not. This isn't unique to Trump, you know, because you always have people saying that, like, even analysts, well, that policy didn't work out as planned. Wow, that really backfired, and so on, because the outcome was not the outcome that was outlined by the original rhetoric. No, the outcome was exactly as desired. The rhetoric was, you need to think about the fact that state governance, federal governments, is going to disintegrate. It's disintegrating now. The state's only function is going to be to police you, not to provide for you, not to protect you. So if you have any sense at all, then you're going to need to start looking at the state as an occupation force that you have to do your best to try to circumvent, to try to navigate your way around. Because their job is going to be literally to disenfranchise you, dispossess you, disempower you, impoverish, and subjugate you. Mark my words. I'm not being hyperbolic. That's what's going to happen. So you need to put it in your mind that your community is like a people living under occupation. I'm completely serious about this. And you're going to have to do all that you can to try to create your own system of order locally, your own system of management, your own system of survival, independent of the state, independent of the system. And yes, that means creating your own culture locally, a healthy culture, so that the localized system that you build will have humane, healthy, and moral priorities, unlike the state. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to happen immediately, even though we can already see that it is underway in America and in the West generally. But you're moving towards a total system collapse. And I'm not talking about some post-apocalyptic scenario. No, this isn't a zombie movie. But if you want to compare what life was like in the year 2000 with what it's like in 2025, and then you compare what 2045 is going to be like compared to today, it's going to be a dramatic and very grim contrast. But you see, they do it in slow motion. They do it incrementally so that it becomes normalized. But that's why I'm saying you need to start now. You need to start building now. Actually participate in your own survival. Listen, the whole underpinnings of Western so-called civilization are flawed and they're toxic. That's why it built the systems that it built. The scarcity model of economics, the extractive, exploitative mentality. That whole mindset is hostile. You need to transcend that. Like even with money, like I said, you can actually create collective mutual support networks within your community, and you can decide for yourselves how you're going to mediate exchange of goods and services yourselves. You don't have to take their model. You don't have to take their approaches as a given. You could establish credit systems internal to your communities. You know, develop some sort of a value-backed type of a currency or a labor-backed currency, digital or paper-based. You know, it's like an alternative currency that's issued locally, redeemable in goods and services from participating members, but pegged to effort or contribution, not to fiat. You know, create a registry where hours of work across all different fields are valued in units and stored in personal ledgers, allowing for trade even if money gets devalued. You know, redemption via purpose. These credits can be redeemed not just for goods, but for educational access, services, and so forth, linking economy to social agency. These kinds of projects exist in New York, in Switzerland, and other places, where you have local currencies that are pegged to service hours and contribution. I mean, imagine if you could actually secure your basic needs through an alternative local currency, you know, credit for work or credit for service, and you could redeem that at participating stores, participating vendors, and service providers, instead of using dollars from your job. Well, you could actually start saving money, saving dollars, if you could actually secure your needs through an alternative form of exchange. Like I said, these types of things do exist, and you can learn from those existing initiatives. It's not undoable. But let me tell you something, it's going to be difficult for many people to accept. The collapse of the United States, economically, socially, and morally, was not caused by an external enemy. It's not the fault of China. It's not the fault of immigrants. It's not the fault of elections that didn't go your way. It's not even the fault of just corrupt elites. No, the collapse was philosophical. It was spiritual. It was civilizational. The rot began at the root. They built a civilization where the highest value was materialism, where worth was measured in consumption, where success meant accumulation, where GDP growth was more important than human dignity or societal well-being. They mistook endless accumulation for life's purpose, and in so doing, they starved their own souls of meaning. I mean, that would have been enough to lead them astray, but it didn't stop there. They championed individualism to the point of pathology, glorifying personal ambition and disdaining collective responsibility. Their economy wasn't designed to sustain, it was designed to extract. It's a culture focused exclusively on short-termism, the addiction to quarterly profits, election cycles, 24-hour news, the inability to think past next week, let alone the next generation, and everybody has to kiss the ring of the invisible hand of the market. So in the end, this civilization didn't fall because it was attacked. It fell because it forgot what civilization even means, what it's supposed to mean. They forgot what it means to be human. So if there's any path to reconstruction, it has to begin by recentering human life around meaning, not around materialism. Balancing individual initiative against communal obligation. Building economies that are based on reciprocity, not robbery. Institutionalize long-term thinking. Try to constrain the market within the boundaries of morality. I mean, why on earth would you have ever accepted it to be otherwise? And yes, I said reconstruction, not reform, not rescue, not restoration. The system that you built cannot and should not be saved. You don't need to try to save it. You need to try to save yourselves from it. You need to jumpstart yourselves out of the habit of passivity. Like I said, I get accused of engaging in doom and gloom. But that's because you've gotten so habituated to helplessness. Yes, you're going to have to face severe economic hardship. But okay, frame economic turmoil not as the end, but as the end of a broken system, the delegitimization of a broken system. A way to trigger, inshallah, a cultural shift from consumption to meaning, from job-based identity to a character-based identity. You need to start trying to think of yourself, your community, as a small, non-aligned state that's navigating regional instability. Think like that, behave like that, plan like that, because that is essentially what your communities are, what they're going to be. You need to engage in a kind of micro-diplomacy locally with foreign diaspora communities, with immigrant communities who maintain ties to non-U.S. trade networks, especially BRICS-aligned countries. And maybe you can get access to alternative supply chains, informal commerce for your communities and neighborhoods, because you need to build self-sufficiency. The aim here is not to try to survive the collapse in a state of desperation and regress into self-isolation. You need to build resilience. You need to build systems that are ethical, that are collective, that are non-corporate, and that are ultimately liberatory. Moving forward, it's going to be very important for you to remember that collapse is not catastrophe. It's clarification. The deeply flawed and, in fact, corrupt architecture of the Western system has been exposed. And without that exposure, no one would have been forced to ever recognize how profoundly you need to change. Americans looking at empty shelves at the grocery store is going to be like man looking at the abyss. As long as those shelves are full, then you'll never see how empty your so-called civilization is and how empty it has made you. No, you need a whole cultural, psychological, and civilizational realignment. That's why I said no Western theories are going to be able to provide a remedy for you. Your so-called leftists, they'll say that wealth redistribution will solve all the problems. But that doesn't alter the fundamental structure that led to the disparities in the first place. Nah, the leftists, the Marxists, and so on, they're just as much about money and materialism as the capitalists are. Redistribution without structural correction is just a management strategy for continuing the injustice and the oppression. For the West, the only framework that you have is either private property or communal ownership. Capitalism, communism. Either private property or state ownership. Private property, yes or no. That same old binary thinking, You don't have a concept that understands our relationship to wealth, our relationship to property, as one of stewardship and custodianship, or as a conduit. It's about circulation, not accumulation. Wealth isn't something to brag about. It's something that you will be asked about, what you did with it and what you did to get it. But you can't get past the having it part, You need to get past that. But the whole system that you have has put you in such a desperate situation that you can't get past that. And see, they've got you feeling obliged to these systems that don't fulfill any obligations to you. They have you feeling obliged to it, so that you think that if you abandon those systems, you abandon those theories, you abandon those labels like democracy, capitalism, so on, you think it's some kind of betrayal or some sort of a rebellion. Because again, you have that combative mindset, the with us or against us mentality, even though the us in that framing is actually against you too. No, realignment is not rebellion, it's recovery. It's a recovery from all of the damage that your so-called civilization has done to you and all the damage that is done to everyone else in the world. I mean, I know transformation is going to be hard. You're literally going to have to start from zero. But it has been so wrong for so long that just getting back to zero is actually progress. Because what I'm talking about, the type of changes that I'm talking about, the type of changes that you need to make, what I'm talking about is for you to actually return to the way that healthy societies always used to function before those Western predatory, parasitic, materialistic pathologies took over and drained all meaning from your life. That's why I say realignment, because you're disaligned now. You're dislocated, you're disjointed, you're dysfunctional, and you're broken. And you need to get back into alignment with what it means to be a human being. I've said that decentralization is going to be the theme of this era. But decentralization in the West is precipitated by demolition and by disintegration, while in the Muslim world and in the global South, it's going to be precipitated by building and by integration. It's very different. The distinction is critical. It's somewhat misleading, actually, to talk about decentralization in the West. Or anyway, it would be easy to misunderstand or to overlook what that decentralization is really about, because decentralization in the West is literally about breaking down components of the existing power structure, components that compete with private sector authority. So it's actually a power consolidation move, ultimately, by the OCGFC, breaking down America as the global hegemon, and then breaking down the central authority of the federal government within the country, and then selectively breaking down the localized formal power structures at the state level, basically rendering public sector institutions as redundant to make way for private sector control. Eventually, this could even prompt, like I talked about before, secessionist movements, whether literally or functionally, by individual states inside the United States. Functionally, I think it's inevitable. It's inevitable functionally, as the federal government becomes less and less relevant in terms of governance. So you're going to have individual states in America acting more or less like independent states, independent entities, independent countries, and then some states will even be regional hegemons within the territorial United States. That's already the case, to be honest. I mean, California, Texas, New York, and so on. These are basically domestic hegemons within the United States. So it's not a huge leap to go from that to individual American states conducting their own foreign policy and so on, and really operating like independent countries. And of course, I anticipate something similar to that happening in Europe, as I've talked about many, many times. The EU, the European Union, will certainly dissolve within the next coming decades. Tension and conflict and so forth between countries is already spreading as we speak. In 20 years or so, no one's even going to be able to imagine that Brussels was ever the seat of continental power in Europe. But again, this disintegration will be and is being engineered for the purpose of consolidating private sector power. So yes, what we think of as the formal power structure, government, and so on, this is going to be decentralized through disintegration. But the entirety of the West, America, the UK, and Europe, and so forth, are going to be brought under the domination of the a-national OCGFC, the owners and controllers of global financialized capital, who are non-nationalistic. It's a stateless imperial power that, as of right now, actually does represent the only real global hegemon. As of right now, the OCGFC are the unipolar superpower in the world today. See, there's been a creeping capture of state power in the West by corporate power. That's something that a lot of people fail to notice, or to fully understand anyway. Throughout the colonization period, throughout the neo-colonization period of the global South, the West itself, the colonizing nations themselves, were also being taken over. It turns out that the pillagers who looted Africa, Central and South America, the Middle East and Asia and so forth, they just turned out to be serfs themselves. It's like a bank robber being taken hostage. You come back from your crime spree in the global South only to find yourself being enslaved by your own accomplices. That's what's going on. So in a way, decentralization in the West isn't decentralization at all. It is consolidation. It's demoting every existing nationalistic power center and bringing them all under the totalistic overarching control of the OCGFC. But as I talked about last time, for the population, there will be, or there has to be, some sort of ground-up decentralization whereby communities build their own localized systems to take care of themselves, and these systems could have the potential of actually breaking away from the corporate control system. In the West, decentralization is the aftermath of engineered collapse. It's reactive. It's the result of institutional erosion, civil fragmentation, and the withdrawal of legitimacy from governance. But in our context, in the Muslim world, in the global South, decentralization is proactive, it's strategic, it's regenerative. We are not decentralizing because our states are collapsing. No, we're decentralizing because we are reconstructing ourselves and our traditional ways of governance and relationships of power in our parts of the world. For us, this isn't about breaking the state apart. It's about freeing the state from subordination. So in the formerly colonized countries and neo-colonized countries, there's an element of decentralization in terms of detaching from Western centers of gravity, centers of control, Washington, London, Paris, etc. That's within the global context, there's decentralization. Our countries are no longer going to be ruled or coerced or dominated or subjugated by Western nationalistic powers. America and Europe are going to move to the periphery of our considerations, whereas all we have known for centuries was for them to be at the center of our considerations. Everyone always had to think about what America or what the UK or what Europe wants, what they will do, what they will allow us to do, and so on. Alhamdulillah, those days are over. So that is a form of decentralization. A further form of decentralization will be the fact that we are not going to be orbiting around a single global hegemon, but rather we will, most of us, will be within the sphere of influence of multiple regional hegemons, and those spheres of influence will most likely overlap. In other words, more than one regional power is going to have a stake in this or that country and will have influence over this or that country. More than one state will have that. A perfect example of that would be Syria today. Of course, this is true of most of our countries to one degree or another already, but I think Syria is a good example. So there's not going to be, what multipolarity does not mean is a plethora of strong independent countries. The absence of Western domination will not mean the sudden emergence of a multitude of sovereign, self-sustaining, independent states. No. There will be regional hegemonic powers that share an interest in and an influence over the countries within their overlapping spheres of influence. That doesn't mean that all of those countries will just be complete vassal states. No, there will be degrees of independent governance, but they will exist more or less in an informal system of collective sovereignty. In other words, their sovereignty will be achieved through the synthesis of multiple coordinated cooperating powers who serve and protect their shared interests in those countries, the countries within their combined spheres of influence. So again, take Syria. Turkey has a stake, the GCC has a stake, even Russia has a stake, Iran has a stake. So Syria becomes a sort of protectorate under half a dozen more powerful countries, all of whom collaborate, coordinate, and cooperate in concert to try to stabilize and develop and secure and manage Syria. The extent to which any particular country may already independently be strong or strategic or important, that will determine its own role within the sort of collective sovereignty structure and how much leverage they have vis-a-vis the other hegemonic regional powers, like Egypt, for instance. Egypt is an incredibly important and strong country. In certain areas, Egypt is a regional hegemon in its own right, in some areas, but not in others. But see, that's the genius of this sort of system. It's mutually reinforcing, it's mutually fortifying, because the same is actually true of most countries that we can call regional hegemons. The same thing is true. They all have their weaknesses, they all have their limitations, and they have their strengths. But collectively, acting in coordination rather than in competition, they can compensate for each other's shortcomings. So like the GCC can give power to Egypt, and Egypt can give power to the GCC. The geopolitical fundamentals of Egypt, or say Turkey, are far better than the Gulf. But the Gulf has enormous financial power, energy resources, and they've built a remarkable degree of autonomy, a remarkable degree of political reach and connections, and a grid of influence, not only within the region, but around the world, including inside the West. It's like BRICS. By creating a sort of unified portfolio putting all of the resources and all of the strategic leverage that's possessed by each member of BRICS into one group. That group becomes basically the geopolitical BlackRock of the world. They control more resources, more assets than any existing or any imaginable group on Earth. They have the most important natural resources, the most important demographic features, the most strategic waterways and trade routes and ports, the biggest grouping of manufacturers, the biggest grouping of workers and consumers and investors on this planet. See, decentralization through building and integration, collective sovereignty. We decentralize not because we've given up on the state, but because we refuse to let our states be given up to foreign capture. Thus, we circle our wagons, and through multiple centers of power, we become a single power. So in a way, it's similar to how decentralization in the West is actually just a mechanism of power consolidation, but rather than dissolving state power, we connect states through synthesis of mutual interests and mutual or shared priorities and a common fundamental value system. And yes, to fortify and to strengthen us against a common enemy. Let me be clear, when I speak about decentralization in the Muslim world and in the global South, I am not at all advocating, and I should not be misunderstood as advocating, a dismemberment of national authority. I'm speaking about multipolar sovereignty, nations acting together in concert, intertwined in their interests, committed to mutual reinforcement and shared economic protection of one another. But let me also say that this solidarity and this sovereignty can and should be manifest in many ways, also in decentralized ways. Again, from the ground up, through cross-border cooperation among people, among businesses, among economic sectors, through private initiatives and so forth. Because our governments shouldn't have to do all the work. They shouldn't have to do all the work themselves. This is a very difficult transition that everyone is going through. You have to understand what colonization and neocolonization really mean, what they have really meant for our countries. Colonization means captivity. That's what it means. The global economy has been centralized in the same way that a prison is centralized. And we've been the prisoners of that system for centuries. And we need to organize a prison break. That's what's going on. In a prison break, you need everyone to work together. Not only work together, but also be capable of working independently. Everyone has to do their job. You have to be able to rely on everyone to do their job. You can't negotiate your freedom from your jailer, so you have to tunnel out. And that needs diggers, that needs watchmen for that. You need your tools for that. You need a getaway car and so on. Everyone's got to do their job, and everyone has to be, you have to rely on everyone to do their job. So we're drawing a map of our escape plan. The global economy is not open and inclusive. Until now, most nations in the world are not truly in the global economy. They're inside the global economy the same way that a detainee is inside of a facility. They're embedded within the architecture, but not as participants, as captives. Their captivity is imposed through a structure of needs that they cannot meet without foreign permission, without foreign currency, without foreign capital, without following foreign regulations. It's the illusion of participation. You know, being connected to the global system is not the same thing as being a participant in the global system. Access is not sovereignty. You know, it's like thinking that if the prison gives you access to certain privileges, it's the same thing as being free. No. Those are nothing but levers of control over you. That's why they give you those privileges. The ability to trade, the ability to borrow, to import and to export and so forth. These aren't signs of power or freedom. They're very often markers of dependency itself. Globalization has made captivity look like participation to a lot of people, but that's not what it is. I mean, take the price of fuel, say, in countries like Nigeria or Pakistan. It's not determined by their own production or by their own consumption. That's not what determines the price. The decisions are made in Washington, what the price is going to be. When the U.S. Federal Reserve adjusts interest rates, the economic consequences cascade across the global South. In Abuja and Karachi, they feel the tremors before the ink is even dry on the minutes of the Fed meeting. Central banks in their countries scramble to try to curb inflation, not in response to any local realities that cause that, but because of the whims of foreign capital. That's captivity. The same is true with food. You know, nations across North Africa and the Sahel import the majority of their food staples. Their ability to eat depends on container ships, depends on insurance premiums, and it depends on commodity exchanges that are located in cities that their populations will never visit. A disruption in the Red Sea, a bottleneck in the Bosphorus, a price spike in Chicago, in the Chicago future markets, makes them go hungry. Their sovereignty is replaced with dependence, and they call it development. Even national economic policies are not drafted for the people of the country itself, but for the approval of ratings agencies. Ratings agencies in New York or in London or what have you, to please Moody's or Fitch or to please the IMF. Governments are pressured into austerity measures, cutting public services, selling off what little remains of the commons. The right to borrow on international markets becomes just a noose, tightening with every downgrade, with every IMF negotiation, with every foreign investor's quarterly report. And if any country dares to try to break free from this arrangement, if it even attempts to define its own terms, well, the punishment is swift. Access is revoked, just like a prison revoking prisoners' privileges. Sanctions are imposed, isolation is enforced, just like being thrown into solitary confinement. Yeah, you've got solitary Zinzana cells in the global economy too. The message is clear. If you want to be a part of the global economy, if you want to engage with the global system, you can only do it on the terms of the West. So you can't even begin to talk about sovereignty of any kind as long as you are in any form of economic captivity. Economic sovereignty is the prerequisite for political independence. Economic captivity is the condition in which a state or a region or a people cannot meet its basic material needs, food, water, shelter, energy, health, so on and so on, without external systems granting access or enabling provision. Captivity is when you need permission to feed your own people, when you need debt to build your own infrastructure, when you need foreign investors to provide your people with jobs, when you need foreign currency in order to buy anything, even from a neighboring country. Economic captivity is enforced by dependency on imports, dependency on capital flows, dependency on multilateral partners, on supply chains that you don't control, and financial rules that you don't write. That's captivity. And it's when you can be punished simply for trying to live outside of those rules. We don't gain freedom by asking for better conditions inside the prison. You understand? You don't achieve justice by negotiating with your captors for better rations or for longer chains. And that's what we've been doing. Economic captivity isn't accidental. It's engineered. It's not a failure of development. It's the intended outcome of the system that was built not for your development, but it was only built to undermine and to control you and to make sure that you didn't develop. The global economy has been utterly and completely corrupted and deformed by Western greed, by Western predation, and by parasitic pillage. They have never operated in the world, in fact, like they're even a part of the human family, let's be frank. They have operated in this world like some sort of alien predator that has just come down to drain the sweat, blood, and tears of the human race and to ransack the planet's resources. That's how they've acted. Like they have somewhere else to go when it's all been depleted. I mean, we have to be honest about this. We have to confront the fact that the West has operated with absolute malice, with absolute contempt for the whole world. Not today, not yesterday, but literally for centuries. And there is no remorse, there is no repentance, there's no rehabilitation. Literally, the only thing that has changed now, today, is that now their malice and their contempt has made them turn on their own nations. They haven't reformed, they're just repositioning. This is the only difference. There's no change in their character. The A-National OCGFC are not our friends just because they're no longer constrained by nationalism. They're just as predatory and just as vicious as they ever were. They are transitioning out of necessity. You understand? And because of their own insatiable predation. That's what necessitated this transition. They're transitioning. Understand? They're not transforming. They're moving. They're not changing. Their nature is the same as it ever was. And if you take a wide-angle view of how the world is shaping up, we're actually not talking about multipolarity. We're talking about two major powers, two hegemons, the OCGFC and the collective sovereignty of the Global South. If you want to put it even more simply, then we're talking about BlackRock and BRICS. Now, BlackRock and the A-National OCGFC are working with BRICS, as we know. They're working with the emerging spheres of influence that are building collective sovereignty in the Global South. But don't ever mistake that for genuine partnership. These are like scouting missions. They have to try to recalibrate and to adjust to the new terrain, the new economic and political landscape that's coming into existence by the transition. And they're only doing that to look for ways to try to bring it under their control. That's their whole mentality. They have the entirety of the West under their control now. I mean, literally, you can say that the world is going to be divided now between North and South. America is going to be the organizing instrument for managing up there under the umbrella of the OCGFC. Down here, we have to form a sort of conglomerate of spheres of influence that operates like a unified single hegemon. Do you understand me? You see what I'm saying? This is why our governments are going to need the people to participate in that. They need the help of the people. I mean, the people need to work together. They need to build together. They need to develop together as much as possible. We need to help our countries untether themselves from the West and from Western systems. And a lot of that has to do with the population. We all need to cooperate in this prison break, okay? So if you're going to bust out of prison, you need to know the layout. You need to know the blueprint. You need the floor plan of the facility that you're locked in. And the same goes for the economic captivity that our countries are trying to escape from. You know, it's like those rich people living these, luxurious lives, but they're not really rich. They're just living on credit. That's America. They've been able to keep a sort of a running tab with the rest of the world, with everyone believing that the U.S. was good for it, that they would make it right, that all these outstanding debts that they accrued in terms of their violence and their bullying and their oppression and their exploitation, their toppling of governments, their wars, their neoliberalism, and so on. For a long time, people were willing to have a blind faith that somehow America would settle all those debts with the world, based off of that mystique that they had created. But just like the victim of a romance scam, it's gradually settled in that it was all lies, that it was bait and switch from the beginning. America catfished the world, and we know it now. And we can't unknow it. So everyone is moving on. The game is over. It's the consequences stage now.
Well, you've said that things are going to get pretty bad over here in America, in the West, and I think we are kind of seeing that happening now. As an American, do you ever feel sorry about this, or do you ever feel bad about what's happening?
Well, I speak as a Muslim. I don't speak as an American. I speak as a Muslim. American is just an incidental part of my identity and my history. But what I will say is, I don't think that there's any reason. This isn't something that we're doing to you. This is something that you've done to yourselves. You are facing the consequences of your own actions. And I've never felt bad when someone faces the consequences of their own actions, even if it's me. The time to feel sorry and the time to feel sad is long before the consequences come. That's when you have a chance to make tawbah, when you have a chance to repent, when you have a chance to atone. But by the time the consequences arrive, by the time you have to face the consequences, well, it's too late to be sorry. It's too late to feel bad. It's too late to be sad about it. It doesn't make any more sense to feel sad or to feel bad or to feel sorry about the consequences of your actions once they come and you have to face them. It doesn't make any more sense for you to feel bad about that than it would make sense for you to feel sorry or to feel disappointed when you bake a cake and put cyanide in it and it turns out to be poison. You poisoned it. These are the consequences of your own actions. I don't feel sorry for the consequences, for the outcome of your deeds. I feel sorry for the choices you made to choose to do the deeds that you did. You understand me? Because it would be an absolute anomaly of nature if all of the evil and all of the wrong that the West has done all around the world to so many people for so long, if the consequences of those actions did not come back upon them, that would be an anomaly of nature. You said people are going to suffer, but people have been suffering. People have been suffering. It's just always been somebody else. Nobody asked you if you felt bad about the suffering around the world that you were causing. And now you're asking the people who are your victims, who suffered because of you, you're asking those people if they feel sorry about you suffering the consequences of having caused their suffering. No, I don't feel bad about it. No one should feel bad about it. Now, I don't feel happy about it either. It's just this is just the way life goes. There's no point in having an opinion or having any feeling about it any more than there's a reason for you to have a feeling about the fact that the night follows the day and the day follows the night. This is just the system of the world.